I'm starting with verse number 30. Pravrittim cha nivrittim cha karya karye bhaya bhaye bandham moksham cha ya veti buddhi sa parth satviki. So today we start with the buddhi and we are talking about the sattvic buddhi. Oh, that's nice to have Sonia on the video call. That's good. Okay. So this verse translates to verse number 30 translates to the intellect that knows activity and renunciation, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, fear and fearlessness, bondage and liberation. That is Satvik, O Partha. Let's take this up word by word. Pravrittim is activity, cha and nivrittim, renunciation, right? Cha and karya, akarya. So karya is what ought to be done, akarya is what ought not to be done. Bhaya, abhay is fear, abhay is fearless. So bhaya, abhay becomes fear and fearlessness. Bandhanam, bondage, what keeps us bound. Moksham, liberation. Cha and ya, that. Veti knows. Buddhi, intellect. Sa, parth, that. Parth is name for Arjun. Satviki is the gunas of sattva. So the intellect that knows activity and renunciation, what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, fear and fearlessness, bondage and liberation, that is Satvik, O Partha. Let's chant it together. Pravritim cha nivritim cha karya karye bhaya bhaye बन्धनं मोक्षं च या वेति बुद्धि स पार्थ सात्विकी. So we are talking about buddhi. Buddhi, intellect, we had discussed somewhat in the last session, verse number 29. Some bit we recapped. We'll go into detail again once more so that we understand the gunas with respect to the buddhi. But in the context of the Bhagwad Gita, we have been covering buddhi. This is not the first time we are talking about buddhi. So I would like to build the context. And in chapter 7, the Jnana Vigyan Yoga, where we had discussed the higher and the lower natures of Brahman, we had talked about buddhi. And would like to draw your attention to verses 4 and 5 of that chapter. Chapter 7, verse 4 read, red earth, water, fire, uh, air, space. So the five Panch Mahabhut, five elements, the five great elements actually, mind, intellect, and also ego. So Manha, Buddhi, and Ahankar, these three were also in the Prakriti. So the verse read that earth, water, fire, air, space, mind, intellect, and also ego, such is the eightfold division of my Prakriti, the lower nature of Brahman. And verse 5 talked about the higher nature of Brahman, the life element of the Jeev Bhuta, which enabled the lower nature in the manifested universe and how it supports the universe and all the manifestation actually. So when we talk of ourselves, so we are coming from there. I'm just building the context so that it's we know where we are. So our lower nature consists of both subtle and gross matter. We are in this is matter we are talking about, but one is the subtle manifestation and other is the gross manifestation. So the five great elements Akash, Vayu, Agni, Jal, and Prithvi, they are the gross manifestation of matter. Intelligence, buddhi, man, mind, and ahankar, ego. These are the subtle variations of the gross matter. And of course, we had understood then, and we revise now, that the lower nature by itself is inert. It has no life by itself. It is the life giving force, the Jeev Bhoot, or the Supreme Self, that when it functions through the material equipment, it uh, produces the manifestation of living beings, right? So you also have a dead body, all the gross elements are there, but because the life giving force or the Jeev Bhoot is gone or the spirit is gone, it is dead, it's not living, right? So it's not enabled. So in human beings, buddhi, manha, and ahankar, or intelligence, mind, and ego, are the subtle manifestations of matter, and our body, which houses the five senses or the five gateways, or the Gyanindriya, the five organs of action, the Karmindriya. This is our the gross manifestation of matter. So the subtle body, which consists of buddhi. Now, buddhi thinks, reasons, discriminates, judges, and then decides on a course of action. What needs to be, how do we need to send our response back into the world? Mind emotes, and ahankar creates the I-ness in us, the doership, and that is how these variations are, and this is where we were. I mean, this is what we have done, just recapping it in the right context. So when we did verse number 29 of this chapter, we talked about buddhi or intellect, which is our capacity to think and reason. It grasps what is happening around us. So, if there is an earthquake or if there is a fire, you experience that, and your buddhi tells you that, okay, let me get out of the house, or let me call the fire ambulance. So the ability to grasp what is happening around us, it thinks and analyzes, and then it chooses a course of action. Now, discrimination also distinguishes between the right and wrong, and therefore, it is the right understanding or the capacity to understand, right? So, this is buddhi. Now, in this verse, we are talking about sattvic buddhi. So, what is sattvic buddhi? Which is able to discriminate. That discrimination is the essence of buddhi, is the quality of buddhi. So, which can differentiate between pravrittim cha nivrittim cha. All right. So, the first two set of words, activity and renunciation. So, what is our pravritti? What is our nature? It is a result of our vasanas. So, our field of activity depends on our nature, tendency, vasanas, and this is what is our swadharma. When we go against our nature, against our tendencies, it becomes pardharma. And draw your attention to the Karma Yoga chapter 3, verse number 35, where Lord Krishna had told us that better is swadharma, one's duty, though devoid of merit, than pardharma, duty of another, well discharged. Better is death in swadharma, pardharma is fraught with fear. So this verse is saying that that I mean that verse number 35 of chapter 3 said that we should be choosing our field of activity in accordance with our vasanas, right? So sattvic buddhi, coming back to this verse, to the current verse, sattvic buddhi understands the difference between what is our pravriti and what is against a pravriti, or what is swadharma for me and what is pardharma for me. Therefore, it chooses swadharma or activities in accordance with one's vasanas and rejects pardharma or activities which are against my vasanas or my nature, right? Okay, question which we will discuss later is, why is this important? The right uh, choice. Okay, so we'll discuss it in the question answers
Why
session.
give so much importance to vasanas is
We
what
have
I'm
to sublimate. Yeah, we'll take it up in detail. It's, we need to discuss this. So the second set of things is karya. What ought to be done and what ought not to be done. Now, having chosen a field of activity based on our tendencies, the sattvic intelligence next channelizes actions in the right direction using discrimination, righteousness, ethics, morals, etc. Right? So essentially, it is the field is chosen. Now the buddhi is directing the right action in the right direction. And see, intellect, buddhi is intellect, and below that comes the mind. Manaha is also the subtle variation of matter, but the mind chatters. We call it the chattering mind. It works on likes and dislikes, and it goes away with the likes and dislikes. So if I don't like to do something, I will not do, but I like gymming, so I will do it. you know Maybe 1 or 2 hours is just sufficient, but I'll do it 5 6 hours, which doesn't work. So but that is the way the mind is. However, the sattvic buddhi rises above the mind's action and guides proper action, regulated action. It also knows what is, or discriminates between what is obligatory and what is not obligatory. Right? And you may recollect that this we had discussed in detail in chapter 5. Actually, those three chapters, Karma Yoga, chapter 3, Gyan Karma Sannyas Yoga, chapter 4, and Karma Sannyas Yoga, chapter 5. They are the basis of all the actions that we do, and we really need to internalize that chapter. And therefore, we keep coming back to them whenever we are talking about action, actor, etc. So, in chapter 5, we had discussed in detail that the roadmap to rise above this likes and dislikes, not to function at the level of the mind. So, after identifying our core interest, we zero in on our passion, talent, right? And fix an ideal which is selfless, which is not for me, my family, and myself, but for a larger, for the larger society. And then we work towards dedicatedly towards that goal, right? So this is what we had discussed in chapter 5. The next set of words that are used here are bhay, abhay, fear and fearlessness. So see, what happens is that the objects of the world is what our senses perceive, and that is where we run. So in we evaluate the sense world, or we do a wrong evaluation of the sense world, and we become attracted to and embrace these objects indiscriminately. Now, fear arises from wrong attractions to these objects. We plunge indiscriminately into sensual indulgences, immoral activities, emotional relationships, and that is what leads to stress and anxiety in ourselves. The sattvic buddhi evaluates rightly and discriminates between what is to be feared and what is not to be feared, or makes a right choice of action. So this is the next set of words that we are using. Then next, the first set of verses in the second line: bandham, moksham, bondage and liberation. So bondage is always created by the wrong identification or attachment. By attachment to the body, mind, and intellect, we are creating these bondages. We also have the Jeev Bhoot within us, but we identify with the material layers of ours, which is the body, mind, and intellect, and we don't stop identifying, or we don't see that Jeev Bhoot, so we don't identify, or this is ignorance actually, with that aspect of our personality. Now, when we function at the body, mind, and intellect level, we are functioning normally on likes and dislikes, and the indiscriminate contact that we go in for because of our likes and dislikes, we strengthen these bonds. The likes and dislikes are bonds. Why? Because they add to the baggage of our vasanas, and these can also be categorized under the three gunas. Chapter 14 explained how the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, bind us. They are the binds. And what do they bind us to? Future births and deaths. So, when there is a body, old age and death are the natural consequences. That is the, in fact, the only reality that we know. We need to shift our attention and identification from the gross material layers to that sublime, that supreme reality. And this is what is actually, when we are talking, if you again and again, we should go revisit the name of the chapter, Moksha Sannyasa Yoga. This is what we are talking about. And our scriptures are continuously telling this to us time and time again. In Bhagavad Gita, we are continuously reading that we should do our obligatory actions. They are the only actions which don't taint us, which do not bind us, which are not the cause for future births. They liberate us. Obligatory actions liberate us because no more desires and vasanas are generated. In fact, they sublimate our existing vasanas. So they are the ones, actions that we should be doing. And of course, the famous story of Kathopanishad, uh, where Lord Yam, who is approached by child Nachiketa, and Lord Yam gives him three boons. So when uh, Nachiketa asks the question, what is his question? That one of the boons is that there is doubt as to what happens to us when we die. Some say we continue to exist, and others say we don't. So you tell me, he tells Lord Yam, you tell me what is the reality, what happens actually. And of course, Lord Yam tempts the child with riches, progeny, wealth, lands, etc. But the child knows that uh, all this is useless, and he tells Nachiketa tells Lord Yam that you keep these, they have no value to me. I would rather have my question answered, because I know that no human can be ever satisfied with wealth. So then, of course, Yam is happy to have a true seeker uh, with him. And then he talks about, one of the things that Lord Yam talks about is the two paths that we have been talking again and again, the Shreya path, which is not visible to the senses, and the Priya path, which leads us out into the world, which is visible to us. The Priya path, where we function on the mind. The Shreya path is where we let our intellect take us inwards. Another point is that when we have taken a birth and we are a baggage of vasanas, we act, we have to. We all have to act because that's why we have taken a birth. However, there are two ways in which we can act. One which binds us, the Priya path, and the other that liberates us, the Shreya path. So the Sattvic Buddhi distinguishes between the path that binds and the path that liberates, or distinguishes between bandhanam and moksha. Discrimination being the essential attribute of buddhi, such an intellect, the sattvic intellect, aligns with that Paramatman and lets us function in the world doing our obligatory actions. This is sattvic buddhi. Let's move on to verse number 31, where we talk of the rajasic buddhi. Yaya dharmam adharmam cha कार्यं च कार्यमेव च अयथावत् प्रजानाति हि बुद्धि सा पार्थ rajasihi. So the verse translates to that the intellect, which wrongly understands righteousness, dharma, and unrighteousness, adharma, and also what ought to be done, karya, and what ought not to be done, akarya. That, O Parth, is called rajasic. Word by word, yaya, by which. Dharmam is righteousness, adharmam is unrighteousness, cha and karyam, what ought to be done, cha and akaryam, what ought not to be done. The words that we used in the previous verse also, ev even, cha and ayathavat is wrongly, prajanati understands, buddhi intellect, sa that Parth name for Arjun, son of Prithu, Rajasi is the gun Rajasic. So the intellect which wrongly understands uh, righteousness, dharma, and unrighteousness, adharma, and also what ought to be done, karya, and what ought not to be done, akarya, that, O Partha, is called Rajasic. So let's chant. यया धर्मम् अधर्मं च कार्यं च कार्यमेव च अयथावत् प्रजानाति बुद्धि सा पार्थ राजसीः. So we now come to the Rajasic Buddhi. What the verse is saying, that the Rajasic Buddhi cannot clearly discriminate between dharma and adharma, karya and akarya. So, why do you think this confusion arises? Anyone would like to answer that? Why does this confusion arise in us? Okay. The confusion arises because of attachment and having selfish goals. So, till the time these two factors are not in play, we are able to discriminate. Most of us are Rajasic. So till the time these two factors don't come into play, attachment and selfish goals, till that time we are doing fine. But the moment any of these or both of these come into play, we lose our discrimination. And what is happening is now that the actions which arise from ego and egocentric selfish desires are unrighteous or adharmic, and actions that arise once we have gone beyond our ego and attachment, they are righteous or dharmic. Now karya, or things to be done, or obligatory actions, and so the word same reference as in the previous verse, karya is always referring to the obligatory actions, things we should be doing, and akarya is always things we should not be doing. Now the rajasic buddhi, colored, yeah, okay, bye Bina. The Rajasic intellect or buddhi, colored by attachments, likes and dislikes, is
Thanks. Thanks. Bye.
yeah, bye, is unable to discern the proper course of action. Right? It becomes confused between what is important and what is trivial, what is permanent, what is transient, what is valuable and what is insignificant. At times we see it clearly, or the Rajasic intellect sees it clearly. But when self interest comes into play, it becomes tainted and confused. For example, the teacher or teacher is one of the best teachers, right? But when the teacher's own child comes into the same class as the teachers, the buddhi, the sattvic buddhi maybe tends to become rajasic. Now it's colored by attachment to the child. Right? Same thing for an established surgeon who is renowned for surgeries in a particular field. Is the complete intellect, buddhi, is not available to that surgeon while performing a surgery on his or her own child. So what is happening in both these cases? The attachment to the child is preventing them from proper perception and conduct. So this is what the rajasic intellect is. And when we also are functioning in that mode, we are wrongly understanding dharma and adharma, and we are confused about what we should be doing and what we should not be doing. That is when we are in the rajasic mode. Moving on to verse number 32, where we talk about tamasic intellect. अधर्मं धर्म इति मन्यते तमसावृता सर्वार्थान् विप्रीतांश्च बुद्धि स पार्थ तामसी. So the verse translates to the intellect enveloped in darkness, which regards unrighteousness, adharm, as righteousness, and all things perverted. That, O Partha, is called tamasic, word by word. Adharmam, unrighteousness. Dharmam, righteousness. Iti, thus, ya, which, manyate, understands or thinks. Tamsah, in tamas or in darkness. Avrata is enveloped. Sarvarthan, all things. Vipritan, opposite, perverted. Cha and buddhi, intellect. Sa, that, Parth, name for Arjun. Tamasi, tamasic, the guna tamas. So the intellect enveloped in darkness, which regards unrighteousness, adhar, as righteousness or dharm, and all things perverted, that, O Parth, is called tamasic. Let's chant it together. अधर्मं धर्मेतीय मन्यते तमसावृता सर्वार्थान् विप्रीतांश्च बुद्धि सा पार्थ तामसी. So again, drawing your attention to the 13th verse of 14th chapter. 14th chapter was Gunatraya Vibhag Yoga, and we were talking about the uh, detailed, I mean, we did a detailed analysis of the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Verse number 13 of this chapter described the symptoms of Tamas, which were dullness, inertia, heedlessness, and delusion. And the ninth verse mentioned that Tamas of chapter 14, ninth verse of chapter 14 mentioned that tamas veils knowledge, it covers knowledge, right? So, and in this chapter, verse number 22 talked about tamasic understanding as ahatukam, without reason, atatvarthvat, without basis and truth, and alpam, which is partial, superficial. So, we had talked about this, that the dull tamasic clings to a part and interprets it as a whole. Also, this part, partial knowledge, they cling on to it fanatically. Now, this verse, the current verse, is using the word vipreet. Vipreet means what? Opposite, contrary, against. So, it means that this intellect, the tamasic intellect, understands the opposite of what, let's say, the teacher or the guru or the scriptures are saying, and they do therefore contrary or go against what is being prescribed. So the tamasic buddhi is shrouded by ignorance and interprets everything in just the opposite manner, wrong way. So all things appear topsy turvy to a person of tamasic intellect or buddhi. So, when you go to these fairs, at least earlier we used to have these melas in which there was this room which had those distorting mirrors, so there were convex, concave kinds of mirrors in which our reflection was distorted. So we would appear elongated or upside down or compressed. So it's not that we are like that, it's just that the mirror was of a particular type. So the dull tamasic intellect is of that kind. The world is reflected in it incorrectly or wrongly. And therefore, the tamasic intellect understands dharma to be adharma and vice versa. So the dull tamasic is actually deluded, and the delusion is caused by ignorance. And this is the worst form of bondage, because when we are functioning, we in tamas, so even we have these times when we go into tamas, and we are functioning from at the level of delusion, with lot of confusion and without consideration. So the best example is that the dull tamasic knows the traffic rules, right, but does not believe in them. That person thinks that the rules are meant for maybe someone else, so does not follow them. Worse, they will justify the wrong side driving. You see, they will say, okay, I've saved 1 liter of petrol because the next u-turn was like you know 2.5 kilometers away. So they justify this. And would like to take up another example, because we need to understand these small nuances, the differences between when we are in sattva, when we are in rajas, and when we have fallen into tamas. So let's say we have large homes, and we have 3 rooms, and each room, let's say, has a 100-watt light bulb. Okay, one room which we are using on a regular basis is cleaned and dusted every day. So the bulb here shines brightly, and all the objects in this room are seen clearly. Second room, which may be a formal drawing room or something of the maybe the guest room, is cleaned once, let's say, every month. So the light from this bulb, the bulb itself is partially covered by dust, and also the because of this, the objects in the room are slightly hazy. The third room, maybe the attic, which is not cleaned for several years, attic or storeroom or whatever you may want to call it. So here the bulb is covered with a thick layer of dust and dirt, and therefore, even when we switch it on, we are barely able to see the objects in this third room. Our intellect is like that. It's like this light bulb in the 3 rooms. The bulb is getting covered by the dirt of selfish desires, and is therefore not letting us see what is there. And you may recollect, we had talked about the 3 types of desires, sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic, in chapter 3, the Karma Yoga chapter, verse number 38, where we are talking about the 3 kinds of desires. So the verse reads, as fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror by dust, as an embryo is covered by womb, so is this covered by it. So now this means that Paramatman, covered by it, means it is desire. So Paramatman is covered by desire. So this is what that verse was. So fire is covered by smoke, which was the sattvic desire. What was that? That you are able to I mean, the smoke is there, fine. So the fire is not clearly visible, but you know that there is light, there's fire, you can see the flames springing up, and the slightest breeze will remove the smoke. Okay, and so you can see the fire clearly. So that was a sattvic desire, or vasanas, which are propelling action. So what it meant was that because the person, the sattvic person, is working in that, doing, functioning, only doing obligatory actions, the vasanas are so flimsy that any external happening will remove that final layer of film of uh, that cover, and will be able to see that Paramatman. The desires will be removed. The Rajasic desire was talked of as a mirror covered by dust. Okay, so now this means that, firstly, of course, the mirror, when we see a reflection, it is not clear. So the dust, it has to be cleaned. We have to uh, take a piece of cloth and wipe it out. That means self effort is required for to remove or to overcome the rajasic desire. That is the in short what it means. So in the sattvic desire, some external happening will just remove the last bit of desires in the person. In rajas, we'll have to put in self effort. For tamasic, the simile is as an embryo is covered by the womb. So of course the firstly, you're not able to see it completely. That embryo you're not able to see because it's in the womb. And also 9 months are required for the child, baby to come out, right? So that time element is also there for a tamasic person. So, in the same way, the same 100-watt light bulb in this example that we were talking about is giving different illumination because of different understanding. So, the Rajasic Buddhi is like the bulb in the second room, right? Where there is a thin layer of dust which partially obscures light. Of course, the Sattvic was the first room where it was clean, brilliant, and it illuminated all objects in the room. Tamasic intellect is like the bulb in the storeroom, the third room, thick layer of dust through which light cannot shine through. So the discrimination is non functional. So even though the light is being supplied, the bulb is lighting, but it's not able to illuminate. So the dull tamasic intellect, the world appears perverted, just as to a drunkard who's walking home at night, the whole world, the street appears, topsy turvy, and the person is disoriented because the person is responding accordingly. So, with that, we conclude